My name is Michael Thomas, and I'm the superintendent here with Colorado Springs School District 11. And I think I've been in education for about 25 years, maybe a little bit more. Yeah.
So how did you first become interested?
You know, I first became interested when I started, well actually it started when I worked at the YMCA. I worked in an after-school club that was at that YMCA site, and we'd have students who didn't have supervision at home who would come there for a couple hours before or after school. And you know, I was young in college. I think I was a freshman in college, and still trying to figure out life myself. And I was playing foosball with this young guy named Reggie. He was 10 years old. And we would play foosball every day, and that was like his thing. And we'd do that after homework help. And then one day he said, "Man, I wish I had a dad like you at home." And for me, it was one of those moments of realizing what my true purpose in life was about. And you know, I was using him as a paycheck. He was using me as a father figure. And I had to ask myself, what's wrong with this picture here? What do I need to do differently? Because, you know, I had not made the best choices in my life up to that point, and still was struggling trying to find my path. And I knew at that moment, moving forward, I want to work with young people, you know, for the rest of my life. And found myself doing a lot of community-based work in different agencies. My background is a social worker, so I'd work a lot with individuals but also with families. And then I was asked to do some school-based mental health programming in St. Paul Public Schools. I'm originally from Minnesota, and I fell in love with the school structure, and I just have never turned back. I've always been in schools since that time. Yeah, so because Reggie made such a powerful impact on my life, at the time I chose to go into social work, because social work was the field that would allow me to not only work with Reggie, but I could work with the family and also work in the community. Social workers are trained to take on an ecological perspective or a systems perspective, where everything and everyone is connected. So the situation with Reggie, he was in a very abusive home, and he unfortunately was removed through child protection. And I wanted to really affect those kind of systems that would really help young people to not find themselves in these really scary and traumatic situations. So I did my undergrad in social work, and started doing a lot of practice, like I shared earlier, in the community. Probably, let's see, I graduated, that was 93. I think I went straight into my master's program, maybe a few months after I graduated, and did my master's in social work as well. And I thought I was going to open up my own mental health clinic, because within the African American community, mental health has not been really viewed upon as a favorable thing to acknowledge. And everybody needs a good mental health support system. I always liken it to getting your teeth checked by your dentist or getting your oil changed in your car. You know, as people, we take on a lot, and we might not have a clinical diagnosis, but it's always good to really talk with somebody from now, you know, every now and then, just to release a lot of maybe pressures that you're experiencing, and you know, maybe you're stuck in your life and you want to kind of figure some things out. That's what great mental health practitioners can do. And so I wanted to do that. And that's why I was invited to go into St. Paul schools to do a lot of mental health work with young African American boys. And it was just one of those opportunities for me. I just, you know, found myself doing well professionally, but also giving back to a community that really needed the support. And after I did my master's, I had an opportunity to go back and do my doctorate in educational leadership. You know, I had moved on in my career into another neighboring school system, a large suburban school system, probably similar to a D20. And I met with the superintendent one day, and she's like, kind of asked that one question of, what do you want to do when you grow up, you know? And again, I must have been 30 years old when I started in there, so I wasn't terribly old, but I wasn't young. I was kind of in that mid-career trying to figure some things out, and I said, I want to become a principal. And I was in my doctorate program, and I did all my principal's license and superintendent license while I was there. I had a great mentor who said, "You're going for a terminal degree, you'll never go back, so get everything and anything you need from that degree, because once you're done, you're done." And so that advice really pushed me to do all that licensure work, and then I became an educator, like a formal educator. I was a principal, elementary principal, and that was the best job, and then I was a junior high principal, and that was even better. Junior high was probably my sweet spot. All my years had been in elementary, and then when I got to junior high, kids are in that crazy phase of their life. They're in that developmental, trying to figure themselves out, and I think I was just as crazy as the kids were, and that's why I did so well with those that age group. But and then kind of worked my way all the way up through different systems. I went back to Minneapolis Public Schools. And I was there for 7 years, and I started off as a principal supervisor, supervising a portfolio of principals, and then eventually worked my way to the point where I was the chief of academics, leadership, and learning, and supervised all the principals in the district as well as everything academic, all the academic departments. And it was a huge job in that kind of a district, and it really prepared me, I think, for a lot of future work. And here I am now in Colorado Springs as the superintendent, and a lot of my work experience, from starting off as a social worker to being the chief of academics, really has helped form who I am as a superintendent today. So I think number one, you have to have a mindset of wanting to help people. Even as a formal classroom teacher, you still are helping people, right? So that's got to be number one. You also have to want something kind of service above yourself. You don't go into education to become rich or the next Bill Gates. It's just not going to happen, right? I think it's one of the most important career paths somebody could choose, but unfortunately it's not validated economically as such. I will be curious to see with COVID, as we come out of COVID, I should say, the demand for educators is going to be significantly higher. There weren't a lot of people going into education pre-COVID, and so those who stay might be able to demand more compensation or more supports, etc., than maybe before. And I think the profession is recognized as one of the most critical frontline services outside of doctors, nurses, and people in the fire and police. This is a critical service that we offer. So you want to be able to be in a service above self mindset, I think, as an educator. Knowing that your compensation, albeit may not always be monetary, but you have to know that you are truly affecting change in the world. You're creating the next Bill Gates, right? You're creating the next president or the next veterinarian or the next movie star or, quite frankly, the next teacher. You never know, what's going to bloom with the seeds you plant, and that's always exciting too. The typical starting salary, and these are just some averages, probably around $30,000, maybe $35,000. And I know to somebody just coming out of college, that might seem like a lot of money, but when you start adding up anything like student loans, rent, or gas, and those kind of things, $35,000 goes away pretty quickly. And so like I was sharing, I believe people who come in here to education, myself included, I wasn't looking to get rich. There was something else driving me. And I think that's a typical story you'll hear of at many educators. It was a student, it was a teacher that they had, or something that really propelled them to go into education. And you can't put a price tag on the discovery of learning that happens with students, and so you can't quantify that. And I think as educators we understand that. But taking precautions that teachers have never had to take before. So I think the mindset of teachers moving forward is going to be a bit more reserved of, I don't know if I'm ready for that or want to take on that kind of responsibility. So I think we're going to lose more. And then those who do stay, I think two things. One, I think they will demand a lot more support to be in these roles. And I think that support may come with compensation asks of, hey, you want me to take that risk? Well, what's the pay increase for that risk? Okay, I think that's going to be a real conversation the industry is going to have. As a superintendent, you have a very unique work environment and a very unique schedule. And I watched enough superintendents and worked very closely with many. I knew what I was kind of getting myself into. It's not your typical 8 to 5 day, or even that of a teacher. You go in at 7 and you're done by 2:30. That's not how a superintendent works. My average day is probably around 12 to 15 hours a day. So do the math on that, for 5 days a week, 60 to 80 hours. And my times, I was sharing with you, I'm usually awake by 4:30 every single day to at least get a good cup of coffee in, and then start in on some emails. And then when I get into my workflow of the day, which typically will start around 7, sometimes 7:30 of my meetings, I literally will be doing that until the end of the day. Now, I have a great assistant whom you spoke with that literally runs my professional life. So Mondays and Fridays typically are days that I would spend in schools all day long. And when I go into a school, it's usually to, one, just observe what's happening, in our schools. If you think about sports, that's like the field. That's where the game is being played. I don't want to sit in the stands in this office. The less time I can spend in this office, the better the day I have. So Mondays and Fridays are dedicated to that. I would also do classroom observations with principals. I might do coaching with principals. And I was kind of sharing with you earlier, if you want to meet me, typically, but I'm not in a usual pattern right now, you would have to meet me at one of my schools. That's how committed I've been to make sure every school has a formal touch point for me at least twice throughout the school year. And some I spend more time in based upon some of the challenges or successes that are happening. Tuesdays, I spend, unfortunately, almost all day in meetings. And meetings in here. So I have 8 until 11 is what's called cabinet meetings. And that's me, my executive cabinet, and all the executive directors in the organization. They come together, and it's our kind of informational what's happening in the district kind of meeting. Or we're preparing for a board meeting, so we're going through a presentation ahead of time, giving feedback to that person, etc. And then in the afternoons, I have all my one-to-one supervision meetings with my direct reports. And those are about an hour long each. And every other Tuesday, I meet with a different group of them. So over the course of 2 weeks, I have one-to-one in time with all of my direct reports. Wednesdays are days that I usually have with a lot of business or community kind of meetings. And then Wednesday evenings are committed to board meetings. Thursday mornings, I have executive cabinet, which is all kind of like my direct reports, and I only meet in here, and that's like an 8 to 11. And then that afternoon, I'm in business community kind of meetings with the mayor, CEOs, all those kind of folks that kind of are partners to what happens here in D11. And then Fridays, again, I'm in schools. That's typically what my work week looks like. And then there will be other community events, like just a couple of weeks ago we had the City Serve Day with 'Cause I Love You. And a lot of our staff are involved with that, so I'll be at those kind of events. Or we had a big fundraiser with the Rotary, which happened on a Saturday evening, and so I'm at that event. And so there's a lot of events that I have to go to. And some are very fun, and then some are just like, I got to politically show up and put my face out there and do those kind of things. And that's the part of my job that I don't like the most, and that's, you are in a lot of political environments, and I can do it. It's just not something I have a passion for. Nothing beats my Mondays and Fridays when I'm seeing students, seeing staff in schools. So that makes up for all the politicking that I have to do as well. I would say, as the superintendent, everything kind of stops with you. So you don't have anybody else to say, oh, they didn't tell me, or it's that person, right? Everything, all the accountability comes to me. That's an immense amount of pressure. And so I think going into that role, you have to be willing and able to accept that level of pressure. So COVID is a perfect example. I always tell people this is a lose-lose proposition for me as a superintendent. Half the community wants to come back into our schools and half the community wants to stay home. I can't make a decision that will make both happy. I try and understand what both sides are saying, if you will, and I err on what's best in terms of safe for our students and our staff. But nonetheless, in this situation, I have a split community where I'm just not going to survive that. I got to accept the fact that this group is going to be unhappy with my decision. We're going to have to move forward. But personally, inside, I like to please people. So to accept that is really hard for me. So that's one big challenge, is those kind of pressures. I would also say that we're dealing with situations in our district that aren't always within the scope of our control. And so when you think about homelessness or poverty or English acquisition status, a lot of those factors are coming from the outside and showing up in the classroom. And our staff have to address those, right? And a teacher really just wants to be a teacher, not necessarily a social worker, or a counselor, etc. But you find yourself as an educator wearing multiple hats at the same time to meet the needs of that individual student. And sometimes, again, at the teacher level, they have to accept not everything that they do is going to reach every student. We might find that a student just falls off, right, because the family is constantly moving because of homelessness. We can't control what happens to that family out in the community, but nonetheless, when that student shows up, with not much to eat, not knowing where they're going to sleep that night, and then we're going to ask them to be fully engaged in learning that day, right? That's a hard thing for a teacher to do, and so I think coming into this field of education, you have to also be willing to accept a lot of things in our community that we may not like that actually find themselves showing up in our classrooms. Schools are microcosms of the community, right? So that's something I think is a challenge. But even with all of those challenges, again, when you have a student that says, I wish I had a dad like you, or when you have a student say, it's because of you that XYZ happened, positively in my life, you have to file those kind of stories away because they're far and few in between. But when you get those, that is a reminder of, oh yeah, that's what this is all about, right? So that's what I would share, maybe of a couple of more of those challenges that I think are very real. Yeah, it's a struggle. I guess that's another challenge. I'm in a very unique situation right now. I'm from Minnesota, born and raised, and my wife is from California. We've always talked about moving back west, and the joke was we're never moving back to California. I don't want to live in California. And we were here on vacation one time, and we fell in love with Colorado Springs, and Colorado, period. We were up in Denver and just kind of everywhere, and we said, this is a great climate. You don't get extreme weather like Minnesota, where it's 50 below and you get 12 inches of snow on the ground. And in the summertime, you don't have the humidity and mosquitoes, So it was a win-win. It's halfway back to Minnesota and halfway back to California. So when this opportunity came, we said, wow, how ironic. We've always talked about moving to Colorado. Problem was, my oldest at the time was a senior in high school, and our youngest was a freshman. And so it was one of those moments of, what do we do, right? And We knew our senior wasn't going to transfer to Colorado, and our youngest, we said, we'll give her a year. Actually, I think she was a sophomore. Our youngest, we said, we'll give you a year to decide if you want to finish your high school year in Colorado. So I moved here by myself. And it was a decision that we prayed about, we talked about, and we all stacked hands like, this is what we'll do. And so my wife and our girls are back in Minnesota. Our oldest now is in college, and our youngest is a senior in high school. And she decided to finish up there, which is totally understandable. We weren't going to force her to move. But it's really taught me, I don't mind being alone, but what I've learned is that I hate being lonely, right? 2 different places, and that has been a huge sacrifice. For our family in this situation. And thankfully, our daughter graduates this year, and this next summer, my wife will be moving down here permanently. But they've been spending a lot of time here with COVID, though, because everything's online. Our daughter has not returned to Virginia in college, and our oldest is in a hybrid where she can go in or stay home and still plug and play. So they actually come here this Thursday, so I'm looking forward to it. Prior to moving here, though, my role in Minneapolis Public Schools was extremely demanding. Similar to this role, you were on 24 hours a day. Even when you were on vacation, the expectation was that you had your work phone with you. Because Minneapolis was, I would liken it to a level 1 trauma hospital, right? Everything was popping off all the time in Minneapolis. And so you had to be ready to respond to crises that happen a lot. And Minneapolis has areas that are very, very impoverished and gang-ridden, and a lot of things happen there. We've had shootings at our school campuses and things of that nature. I mean, even our our district offices, we were intentional where we built new offices and we were smack dab in the middle of gang territory. And twice in the years that I worked there, we had windows shot out in our offices, and one shot was so large it traveled through a window, an office wall, and a partition into the inside of the building, right? And they were able to detect, from, like 3 or 4 blocks away. So very high power situation of a gun. And that's the kind of environment that you were in. And so it was a sacrifice because I was there a lot. And I gave up, I think, a lot of my own personal family to essentially be the father of thousands of families, right? And that was something that I learned was very unhealthy. I would not encourage that with any career. You have to find balance. With whatever your personal, situation is. If you're single or a family member or whatever, you got to have that place to go that you can truly shut down, and spend quality time, but also rejuvenate yourself. What I have found, and this has been an interesting comment that my wife and I have talked about, I'm probably more present with my family now in this role than I was when I was in Minneapolis and I lived at home all the time. Because even when I was home, mentally I was never home, right? We'd be at dinner, my phone goes off, we'd have to leave dinner sometimes because I'd have to respond to something. Or key issues with, what's going on in the classrooms, I'd have to respond. I mean, that was the culture. So I would tell anybody, whatever career you're going into, but especially education, because teachers do the same thing. They spend countless hours at home grading papers, or whatever, looking at reports that students are writing, and they're doing it on their own family time because there's not enough time in the typical school day to teach and then go through hundreds of papers, maybe at the secondary level, and then be ready to turn back around and do it all again tomorrow. And we all take work home. I take work home now as well. That's, my day that's how it gets to be 15 hours because I might have to do email at home because I can't do email at work, right? I just don't have enough time. So I think educators need to be prepared. You will put in more time than what you're contracted for. But always, always, always take care of yourself, take care of your family. That is going to be your strength to be able to make it in this kind of a career field. I think the future, like I was sharing earlier, is going to go to more of a demand for high quality educators, because there aren't going to be a lot of them as a whole coming into education. Again, I think we are finding teachers through COVID leave the profession because they don't want to take the risks, if you will. Education, I don't think, was ever viewed as a kind of frontline, first responder kind of role. I think COVID has elevated the fact that we really are somewhat parallel, because we're bringing thousands of kids into schools every single day. We don't know what exposure they've had to a variety of things, particularly the COVID virus, and we're asking teachers to take the risk, if you will. We are trained for very traditional, in-person, in classrooms, school buildings, very structured learning environments. Well, I think COVID has taught us that learning happens literally 24 hours a day, and you don't necessarily have to be in a 50 by 50 classroom. And I think we're going to find many families continue to choose online or remote learning options because one of two things, or maybe both. My daughter learns better online. I never would have thought about that, but we were forced to go there, and she is thriving, right? So if you don't offer an online option as a district, you're going to lose many students who are looking for that. And then two, with the COVID virus still with us, I don't know when a vaccine will hit the market, but even when the vaccine hits, I don't think we're going to build public trust about the vaccine for a good year, maybe even longer. So we're going to still have families who are choosing, hey, I'm not comfortable sending my student back. I want an online option. So having a permanent online option, I think, is going to be a necessity, and none of us were really trained that way. So I think we're going through a retraining of staff of how do you engage in a remote learning environment compared to a physical learning environment. Those, I think, are some big changes that we're going to have to respond to as a K-12 industry. Find mentors in the field of education. Something, what you're doing, just you're finding out about, lots of different careers. And so as you go and think about what you want to do in your life, you're getting some good insight as to, oh, this is what it means to be a mechanic or an educator or a doctor, right? You're getting that. Best piece of advice I could give to a young person: find those people in career areas of interest and do a job shadow. I mean, I've had students for capstone projects, spend a half day with me. So they literally walked in my shoes with me, for half the day. And they're either going to be like, wow, I can't wait to become a superintendent, or wow, I will never become a superintendent, right? That's important information to know at a very young age, because what I don't want is our students wasting thousands of dollars in college trying to discover a field of interest. Do a lot of that in high school, and do informational interviews like you're doing, or do a job shadow or an internship if you can. I think that would be very beneficial. I wish I would have had that, because I did spend about a year and a half in college thinking I was become a veterinarian. I loved animals. That's what I could tell you. I had no idea what it would take to be a veterinarian, or the kind of schooling it would take to become a vet. You do actually more schooling to become a vet than you do to become a regular, MD, as a human doctor, if you will. So that's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice I would give to a young person, or anybody, quite frankly, understand the why behind your what. Okay? So you can do all kinds of things. Understand why you're doing that, because your why is your purpose or your reason, okay? And if you understand your why, the what is even better. So one thing I will never do is compromise on the backs of young people. I knew my why when Reggie, made that comment to me. I knew right from that moment, sacrificing the experience or the livelihood of a young person is the worst thing that you could do. So that drives me every single day as a superintendent. That's my why. So when I do something, it's always directly related to doing what's best for students or young people. And if it doesn't do that, then I won't partake in that situation, right? So my why tells me what to do every single day. So that's the two pieces of advice I would give to people.